Hello and good morning. Uh, Welcome to Astrophotography, and in this series of videos, I'll explain everything you need to know about starting astrophotography. Um, this video is going to be a bit long, but within this video, I'll start by explaining every basic idea about astrophotography, the tool you need, and what each part of it does, and changing these parts, how it can affect your astrophotography outcome photo. So since it's gonna be a long video, so I'll start straight away. First, we will start by the components of your setup. The first component of your setup is your tripod. The tripod carries your mount and carries your telescope, your camera, and your guiding system. And I'll be explaining in details what each word of this means in a bit. But to start, you need to understand that your tripod carries everything, so it needs to be able to handle most of the weight that you're putting through that. And this is important, but at the same time, most of tripods nowadays can carry more than you need to start astrophotography, so you don't need to pay a lot of attention to that. However, one of the good mounts that is available nowadays, I have now, this is not sponsored or anything, just I'm showing what I have. This is the ZWO tripod, and it's carbon fiber, so it's light, so it's easy to move. And trust me when I'm telling you about the weight, even if you think that it doesn't matter right now, but trust me, it does when you have to take your mount apart, all of the parts here apart, and then carry them into your car or with you somewhere to a dark skies. This will make a big difference in your laziness, when you decide to go out and then you think about the weight that you're going to carry. Sometimes you feel lazy and then you don't go out. So choosing something that it's light, it's plays a crucial role in that. Next is your mount. The mount I have here is ZWO AM5N, but the idea here is you need a mount that can carries your telescope weight with the camera and the guiding system all along and move them and still have a good performance of guiding. And I'm sure that if somebody is familiar with what I'm saying, they understand that. But since this one is for beginners, so I will assume that you don't know what that means. So I will be explaining that part. However, the point here, if you understand sky, is that Earth is moving, and that makes the stars or the objects that you are trying to capture in the sky with the camera is moving also. So it appears from our perspective that those elements are moving, and you need something that can carry that weight and move, so it can compensate for the movement of the earth, so it keeps the item that you are capturing in the middle of your frame or at the same frame you are doing, right? So this mount is actually moving in two directions, right? And there is two types of mounts. I'm talking about my experience here. So there is two types of mounts. There is the multi-azimuth mount and the equatorial mount. And this is the equatorial mount. And the difference between both of them is that one of them is move up and down, right and left, right? But this mount doesn't move that way. Why that is, I'll explain in a minute. Think about the location of the North Star, and the North Star is looking to this direction, for example. So it's not looking up, it's not looking straight, it's looking in an angle. And because of this angle that you see, the Earth is rotating this way. So you need a mount that have a hinge here, so it can rotate this way and that way, and this is aligned, this direction is aligned with the North Star or the North Pole. So this will allow to move one direction. Why is that? Because think about it this way: the equatorial mount moves with the rotation of the Earth this way, But if you have, so it will make the resolution much higher if you compare it to something like the fork type, which is the multi-azimuth, right? The multi-azimuths move up and down and right and left. So, but the star in the sky moves this way. It doesn't move right, left, or up and down like that. It moves in this direction, right? Or in this direction to be exact, right? Is a curve. So, in order for the equatorial mount, the multi-azimuth mount to follow, which is not this mount, the other one, in order for it to follow an object in the sky, it needs to move. If it's moved from here to here, it means it needs to move this way and then that way, and then this way and then that way, and so go on, which makes the image, while you are taking a long exposure, makes the image a little bit blurry, because every time the mount is moving two directions, up and down, and then, or let's say, little bit down and little bit right, or little bit up and little bit left. So within this movement, the frame of the picture will not be able to capture a clear image. However, in this mount, it will be able to move within the curve. So it's just straightforward, right? So back to the mount. This is the mount, and then you can control the mount from here by manually first to do a polar alignment, which we will talk about in another episode. This is just a basic, but you move it from here to counter the image, to counter the direction of the North Pole star. So your mount has to be directed to the North Pole star when you are aligning, and then once you've done that, by moving this here, which is this part, to move it up and down, and this part to move it right and left. But the general idea here is, if you are using your mount for astrophotography, then if your equipment is weighted for, let's say, for example, a 10 kilogram, which means the tube, the focal reducer, if you have, the camera, the filter drawer, and your guiding system, which is the smaller telescope and the small camera, then all of those, if they are all of those weight 10 kilogram, then your mount need to be able to carry at least 15, 16, 17 kilograms. The more the better. Why? Because it's a strain on the mount for this weight. If the mount can handle 20, then your equipment should not exceed 11 kilogram, for example. This is just a little bit of a shady gray area, but you get the point here. It cannot reach the limit of the mount. That's what I'm trying to say here. Why? Because your guiding system here, accuracy, will depend on that. So you need to be within that range. As I said, all the details will be explained later in a separate video for each system of those. Next part is your telescope, your tube. And your tube will determine what kind of images or what kind of object you will be able to capture with your system. Why I'm saying that? Because the longer focal length you have, the telescope first is determined its power by focal length. We don't say zoom, we say a focal length. And the focal length of the telescope determines how much zoom it can provide. So for example, most of the nebulae in the sky can be observed by 300 millimeter to 700 or 800, but some of them 700 will not do, because they will be too big for that, and you will only be observing a portion of that nebulae. But for Orion, for example, or for the Rosette Nebulae, something, or for the Horsehead Nebulae, something like that, between 300 all the way up to 600, you will be able to capture that beautifully within the frame. And it will help, of course, if you have a smaller sensor. I will explain why later, of the camera, I mean. But the point here is that if you are observing, for example, let's set the rule here. If you are observing, if your targets, I mean, is mostly nebulae, then something between 300 to 500 will be very suitable for that. And the second thing is, if you are observing galaxies, Galaxies looks in the sky very small. They are very big, of course, but they are very far. So they look very small in the sky with the exception of Andromeda. And let's set Andromeda aside here because you will be able to observe Andromeda with a 300 millimeter focal length telescope. But let's focus about galaxies in general, something like the Walpole galaxy, something like the M101, something like M33, something like that. You need a telescope that is have a huge focal length or a big focal length enough. So starting from 500 all the way to maybe you can reach 1500, 2500. I know that most of us, when we are starting this hobby, we are not starting by something huge, and I wouldn't recommend that you're starting by something huge, because when we go through this series, you will understand the difficulties that you are getting by choosing a longer focal length, because everything becomes more sensitive. Your mount becomes more sensitive, your guiding system becomes more sensitive, your camera becomes more sensitive, and everything adds up to the sensitivity of the system, that if you don't know exactly what you are doing, you will be lost in space and you don't know exactly where to go. So the point here is to choose something within the limits. For me, for example, I like to capture galaxies as much as I like to capture nebulae. So I choose something like this. This one have a 714 millimeter of focal length. With a reducer, it reach 570 millimeter of focal length. So this is in a sweet spot for me. Because this will give me the abilities to capture most of the nebulae, not all of them, but also some of the galaxies. And this is kind of a sweet spot for me because I'm interested in both. So it depends on your preference. If your preference is only galaxies, then you need something bigger focal length. But it means also that you have to buy something smaller first to learn how to set up your system, how to do guiding, how to find your object in the night sky, and how to go later on to buy the bigger one, because you cannot start by bigger one. Trust me, it's very frustrating to spend a lot of money for a system that you cannot use. So my advice will always be start by something smaller range or middle range. Something within a 300 to 500 or 600 maximum at the beginning, and then you will have a sweet spot to capture both of them, and also it's not going to be very hard for you to learn at the beginning. Okay, so now we talked about one aspect of the telescope for now, which is only the focal length of it. The rest will be in a specific episode for the telescope or the tube itself. Next one is gonna be your camera here, and this camera, the one we are looking at here, is ZWO ASI 533 MC. What is the meaning? There is many aspects of the camera. There is some cameras, they have cooling, some cameras have no cooling. Why they have cooling? Of course, the camera from inside here, it has a sensor that is actually located within the tube, so it can see what the telescope can see. But the point here, you have two types of camera. You have a cooled camera like this one, which is long and have this kind of black exhaust thing. And you have an uncooled camera. What is the advantage of a cooled camera? If you understand the sensors or photography, I'll explain that now. But anyways, if you understand, you know exactly what I'm going to say here. But the point is, the less temperature the sensor has, the less read noise it has, which makes the noise that you get from the sensor itself is less. Of course, you will get some noise, but the less temperature, the less noise. And since we are capturing something here in the space, and we are opening the shutter speed for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, then will add to the noise. So the lower we can the lower we can reduce the read noise, the better the image gonna look like. So it's better to have a cooled camera that can reduce the temperature of the sensor in order for it to reduce the amount of noise gonna be in your picture, and that's always favorable. So the first thing I will advise is to get a cooled camera. Some people will use DSLRs, but will cause a problem with calibration frames. It will make it much harder. It's not impossible, of course, but it will make it much harder, since you have to take your calibration frame within a specific time. And also, if you don't know what is calibration frame, I'll explain that in details when it comes to the camera itself in details. However, the point here is you have two types, cooled and non-cooled, and I will always advise by cooled because it will help you get easier calibration frames and also less read noise from the sensor. Also, you can combine a telescope that is 300 to 500 millimeter of focal length with a smaller sensor, because the smaller sensor will give you a narrower field of view. So the narrower field of view also will give you the ability, a better ability to capture something. It's like zooming in, but by the sensor, not by the telescope itself. So if you have something with a 500 millimeter focal length and then you combine it with a cropped sensor like this one, then you'll be able to capture something within the reach of the galaxies somehow. Okay, there's many options out there, I'm just saying. And why I chose the ZWO cameras, for example, and the ZWO mount, and also even for my guiding system I chose the ZWO. Then they are not the best in the market, but my point here is that I like to use ASIAIR, and this will get us to the point to understand what is how to control something like that. Controlling the whole system, it's supposed to be through a computer. So you can use Nina, for example, through your laptop, or you can use a dedicated computer for astrophotography that you can connect all of your cameras and your power for the cameras from here and all of your guiding, and control this one through your mobile. This makes it much easier to deal with the system, especially if you're a beginner. I will highly recommend something like that. If you want to learn Nina, with all means, it's amazing software and it's a great software you can learn, and it will do much more than the ASIAIR can do. But for the beginning, I don't think you'll be able to use all of the functions of Nina, and ASIAIR will be an easier approach and it will make your life much easier. I'll get back now to one of the important things, which is guiding. And guiding is basically a smaller telescope, as you can see here, smaller telescope and a smaller camera on the back that is connected to the ASIAIR to be able to get good guiding. And so that leads us to the question, why we need guiding and what is guiding? Guiding is basically, your mount is not perfect. Yes, it can follow the stars or the objects that you're trying to photograph in the sky for a very long time. But for visual astronomy, you'll be able to see it within the frame. Like if you are following Jupiter, for example, if you're following some specific object, then it will still be in the frame, but 100% it will be moving a little bit, like 1 pixel to the right, 3-4 pixels to the left, or up or down. And when you do astrophotography, you need the frame to be exactly as it is, not 1 pixel up, 1 pixel down, because that will produce through the whole night, because that will produce not a clear image. Obviously you understand that part, because if you're taking a photo and your hand is shaking and you're taking a little bit of longer exposure with your mobile for any photo, then the photo will be shaky, and that's what will happen if the mount is not following you exactly. And trust me when I'm telling you, there's no mount in the earth. Well, I mean, there is some of them, but it's out of our reach anyways, and it costs all the ways to $300,000 and $400,000 and $500,000, and most of us cannot afford that. So in order for us to avoid guiding, we need to go with a mount that is 100 times more expensive than what we have here now. So the alternative is to provide a guiding system in order for you to get the same, to achieve the same quality of those mounts, but by something more affordable, and that will take us to guiding. To understand guiding, the camera here will take the photo, for example, now in the sky, and within this photo there will be, for example, 3 stars. This telescope here is focusing on the same image you are looking at, but it sees a little bit farther. It's a wider angle, right? So it sees more stars than this camera can see. So this camera here will see more stars in the sky. So it will take a few stars of those and will determine what is the coordinates of those 3 stars within that frame that you are taking from the smaller telescope. And let's say it took 3 stars, one here, one there, and one down here, right? It knows, it will record that this star is 200 pixels from the top and 300 pixels from the left, from the right. And the other star is maybe 500 from the down and 500. So it gives it an coordinates, like X, Y coordinates within the frame you are capturing. And the job of this camera here is to keep focusing only on those 3 stars and to know their exact position within the frame. So if, for example, the mount is slided a little bit to the right, and then your guiding system will see that these 3 stars now is slided 3 pixels to the right and 3 pixels to the bottom. So it will send a signal to the mount telling him you are sliding 3 pixels to the right, so go 3 pixels to the left, and you are sliding 5 pixels from the top, so you go 5 pixels to the bottom, and so go on. So it keep correcting the movement of your mount, since your mount is not perfect. And that is the function of the guiding system. So now you understand why you need guiding system, why you need a mount that can track, and what is the weight limits of that mount. Now you can understand what is the function of your camera, which is obviously capturing, but also how to choose your camera in the general sense. So these are the components. And lastly, I will explain is the filter drawer here. And you have here a filter drawer, if you're looking, and then inside this one, I have a filter. This is an IR UV cut filter. The subject of the filters are very big, and it will take very long time to explain, so it will be also in its separate episode. But the general idea is that the spectrum of light in general have it's a wide. So sometimes you're capturing something like a nebulae that only emit a specific part of the spectrum of light, and in order for you to get the best out of this session is to ignore the rest of the spectrum and only focus on a specific part of the spectrum, and this is by choosing a specific filter. So there is some of them it's called dual narrowband, some of them it's called wideband filter, and some of them is multi narrowband filters, and some of them is just like this infrared and UV cut filter, which basically cuts the infrared at the top of the spectrum and the UV at the bottom of the spectrum, and leave the visible light only to be captured. And this is the general idea of the filter. So now you understand the components of the mount and the components of the optical tube within everything that within it. Last thing I want to speak about is your power system. All of this need to be powered, of course, right? So that's the easy part. You can use either a battery if you are going outside, or you can use a power bank, a power brick in your home connected to the wall. These systems use, generally speaking, 12 volts. So any 12 volt adapter will do. However, if you are outside, I would recommend to buy a battery system, a power bank system that can connect with a universal system. Here, for example, I'll show you what I have. This is my powers. I created it by myself. It's just 2 batteries with a converter and a volt reducer, since these batteries produce 22 volt instead of 12 volt, and I need to step that down to be able to reach 12 volts. I'll be speaking about batteries also in the battery episode. However, I hope by now you understand the basic idea of the system itself, how it runs, how it works, and how it follows the object in the sky. And if you have any question with this regards, please leave it to me on the section of the comments, and I will be happy to answer them at my earliest. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode when we are talking specifically about the mount. See you.